Both of those moments caught me off guard, not just because of what was happening globally, but because for the first time I thought about my super balance and the way it's invested.
The journey is different for everyone. We all want the same things at the end of it, and that's to live a long and healthy and prosperous retirement.
What are the things that you can do along the way, not just focus on the destination?
Welcome back to Super Insider, your podcast for all things super and retirement. I'm Ruth, and Josh is back with me again today.
I am Ruth. You can't get rid of me.
Now, today's conversation is all about how to plan your retirement roadmap and, more importantly, how to stay on course. But before we tackle this brilliant conversation, please do remember that Josh and I are only sharing general advice today. We do not know your personal or financial circumstances. So Josh, a retirement roadmap is probably a map that can stretch as long as 50, 60 years for some people. And today we're going to talk about some of the important milestones and how to stay on track. But let's just start with, what is a retirement roadmap?
In my head, I think about it that we all get very focused on retirement, and usually
on the destination.
The destination, and normally we think about it when most of the journey's been done. To your point, there's some milestones or steps along the way that you can think about. Over 40, 50, 60 years, perhaps even longer, these are opportunities that can actually really help in building what that destination looks like. So to me, the journey is exactly that. What are the things that you can do along the way, not just focus on the destination? From my perspective, I think there's a couple of key areas we can think on in that journey. There's what you're doing with contributions. It's going to be different, the opportunities and the way you think about that. Same with investments, the way you even think about them, the way you're affected by them, how brave you are with them will change over the course of your life. And then the third one, I think, is financial protection.
Yep.
So along the journey, the insurance you need, the way you think about it, what you're using it for, that will shift.
But if we start with contributions, and if we think about the milestones that you might hit when it comes to contributions along the way, let's just think about someone's journey from the beginning.
Yep.
So when you're very young and you're starting out, contributions is probably something that's a little bit harder to feel invested in. It's harder to convince yourself to do contributions or to make contributions.
For most people, contributions is the most boring part of super. Your employers make it, you don't think about it, done. Right? And I think most people are disengaged with contributions. The thing that I think on when it comes to contributions is starting earlier means that you can do little bits over a long period to have a huge impact. Depending where you are on your journey, as you get closer to the destination, then those contributions maybe need to become a lot larger and a lot more planned out. But that's something we'll come to.
If I think about contributions from my own journey, the role they played changed along the path. The first purpose of contributions for me was to bridge what was already a gap. I was a little bit older getting my superannuation journey started compared to most Australians. You may have detected the accent. But contributions to me was a way for me to bridge that gap that had already formed. Not just because I was later starting out in my super journey, but I also worked part-time for many years and I had some kids and I was in and out of the workforce. And then as I came back to work full-time, as my family started to grow a little bit older and I was back in the full-time workforce, I shifted what contributions meant. It was no longer now staying on track, it was now getting ahead. So when you're getting closer and you're maturing on your journey, the way you interpret contributions and what it's trying to do for you might change.
Well, and I think even in my case, contributions probably started early out in thinking about just putting additional money in, okay? And especially when I started working, was a while ago, Ruth, we didn't have the full super guarantee rate that we now have.
So you are showing your age.
I am showing my age. But there was then a period in my journey where I started seeing the tax effectiveness of contributions. So it became part of a broader tax strategy and thinking. I then met my wife and she took time out of the workforce when our son was born and then went into part-time work. And so contributions became not just what we were doing in regard to my own, but how we were making sure she was having contributions.
But as you're getting older and closer to retirement, there are some opportunities around contributions that present themselves. And we won't go into detail today, but just, things like downsizing your home, for example, opens up an ability to get a significant amount of money into super.
And I do think as you get older, have the expectation that at some point you may come into a windfall.
Yeah,
Okay?
be that
It could
through.
be downsizing, it could be inheritance, it could be selling down an investment.
Could be a lottery win.
Could be a lottery win. Oh, gee, wouldn't that be great? But just have the expectation that at some point in your journey, you may actually have a larger contribution to
so it's not always going to be that drip feeding through salary sacrifice or regular small contributions.
If you're closer to the destination, you maybe have to think about taking bigger and bolder contribution steps.
So that's contributions, figuring out what your milestone is. It'll be different. It'll depend on your age. It'll depend on where you are at the moment. Are you trying to bridge a gap and get back on track? Are you trying to actually get ahead? Are you trying to use it as a way so you can retire earlier? What is it that you're trying to use contributions for?
Well, and even are you saying that where your retirement number is, you're not quite happy with it, so you want to do something bold towards it?
So let's move then to investments and the milestones that you might face when it comes to investing. I think it's not something a huge amount of us think about early on. We tend to leave that to the super fund. There's probably a lot of Australians that don't even know that they have a role to play or can play a role with investing their superannuation. So how would somebody's journey look like when it comes to investing, and what are the milestones to watch out for?
I think we as a super fund think about, for our younger members, how do we make sure they're as growth orientated in their investments as possible? So our younger members, we tend to have a higher exposure to growth assets, things like shares, property, private capital, to really give them the best opportunity to grow their super over a long period. Okay. And it's also conscious of, although investment markets can go up and down, when you're young, you have time on your side to recover. Why I raise that is because for me, it was a set and forget. I have for pretty much 30 years not really changed my investment mix. Where it's been really interesting for me as someone who is in my very youthful 50s, very young, youthful 50s.
On the right side of 50,
on the
is
right
that what you're saying?
That's right. I'm closer to you than the destination. For me, though, in the last 12 months, it's been really interesting. We've had in that period the big tariff disruption in 2025. We've had the Middle East conflict really start to elevate with Iran in early 2026. Both of those moments caught me off guard, not just because of what was happening globally, but because for the first time, I thought about my super balance and the way it's invested during those periods. For the first time, I wouldn't say I felt uncomfortable, but I thought, right, I need to think about this and check in and make sure I'm still okay with it. Now, the reality is that I went through both of those experiences and maintained how my investments are. But what it signaled to me is that that's going to be something that happens more now, that I am likely to be checking in on my investments more moving forward than I have, that I'm likely to consider, am I comfortable with this in a way that I haven't done before? And that shouldn't be something that concerns me or that I'm daunted by. It should actually be something that I recognise as just being where I am on that journey.
It is an important point. Maybe one of your milestones would be something significant that happened in the market that forced you to face reality. Am I invested in the right way for me? Particularly as you're getting closer to retirement, just reassessing how comfortable you are with how exposed, but also not forgetting the day you retire is not the day your super stops being invested, and that it is invested right throughout your retirement. And we talked about this in previous episodes as well, to make sure that you're mindful of the fact that your investment time frame is not from now till the day you retire. It's from now until the day that you've actually passed away, assuming you still had super. The time frame goes throughout your journey.
And if I think about my super journey, Ruth, I'm not halfway yet. I've been on my super journey for 30 years. Based on life expectancy, or if I think about how old my parents have lived, I've probably got 35 to 40 years ahead of me. So I'm not yet halfway. But what I think with that investment piece, though, what was important, although I didn't make a change, it was just important to take comfort in checking in and going, am I okay with this? And I can tell you that although markets have continued being volatile, I have been easier just by knowing that, no, I'm okay with it. Now, in 12 months' time, that reflection may shift. But at the moment, it just gave me the peace of mind that, okay, we're still good with this.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're starting out, you're comfortable with volatility. It's generally not something that's front of mind. Bearing in mind, as you get closer to retirement, your balance is bigger, your time frame is smaller. So there are some times there to be mindful of, to maybe check in and double check that you are on the right track and stay in course whereby you have set an objective and a goal around investing, not panicking, when there's a little bit of a dip in the road, for example.
Nice analogy, Ruth. I think it's also important to keep two things in mind. Your superannuation is a long journey. In the terms of the analogy, it's not a run up the shops, right? Even how I've said that I'm only halfway through my journey. Think about your investments as this 50, 60-year journey that you're on. It still has opportunity. The other thing to keep in mind is, although we've talked about contributions as being important, the reality is when you get to retirement, about 2/3 of your account balance is likely to be as a result of the investment earnings you've received, not as a result of the contributions you've made. The reason I mention that, it gives you really good perspective of the power of investments and the journey you've been on to this point and where its potential continues as well. But if I can put to you, there's a third element we had mentioned, that superannuation is important about making contributions and growth and that investment opportunity, especially with compound interest. But it also offers a really important financial protection. And it's probably part of our financial journey that we don't often think about. How have you thought about insurance as your journey has changed and as you have got to this bright, ripe, young age you still are?
Insurance is something that I think a lot of people forget to check in on throughout that journey. And there are milestones that really should be, I suppose, flags for you to say, you know what, I need to have a look at this. So just for our audience's benefit, there are potentially 3 types of insurances attached to your super. It could be life insurance or death cover, total permanent disablement insurance, and then sometimes people will even have their income protection through super. They are the only 3 you could have. I happen to have all 3 of those policies through my super. There have been milestones along the way that have made me stop and reassess whether I have enough, whether I need more, whether I have too much. I haven't got to the point yet where I feel like I have too much insurance. Some of those key milestones were when I first had my first daughter was born. Suddenly, I was the provider for another little human. I did reassess my insurance needs and I definitely applied for more then. Another milestone was when we bought our first home. But at some point along the journey, insurance conversation shifts because it's not just, I need more, I've had another child, I've had a bigger mortgage potentially, or I've taken out a bigger loan, for example. At some point in the journey, the narrative shifts with insurance, doesn't it? And I'm hinting at maybe you might be closer to that than I am.
So there are now 3 considerations that I've got when it comes to insurance. It's still an important part of my financial protection, but it's perhaps not as important, or it will become less important as time goes on. And what I mean by that is I'm much closer to the age of 60, which we might come to actually. It's an age that gives opportunity that I know I can start accessing my super. So effectively, I've got money there that I can start thinking about as my part of my financial protection that at the moment I just can't touch. The second thing is, as you get older, insurance becomes more expensive. Again, just being confident that the insurance I've got and what I'm paying for it, I'm comfortable with. The third thing in regard to your insurance journey is, hopefully as you're getting older and closer to retirement, you're seeing dependents become more independent. Not in my case yet, but you're hopefully also seeing your debts start to reduce as well. And that just means that the way you think about financial protection isn't more about growth and protecting assets that are still growing. It's now that you're getting to the point of actually starting to shift just what you're using it for and how it works with other things as well.
So you mentioned 60. Age 60 is unique because it is the one age that we all have an opportunity present itself at the same time. What is that opportunity?
Age 60 is, if I give it its superannuation term, when you reach preservation age. Preservation age is when, regardless of whether you're still working or not, you can start to think about accessing your super. That gives you real choices and opportunities, and it also gives you some really good opportunities in just thinking about how you transition to retirement, import some different strategies that you can employ. If I think about between the age of 60 and 65, which is a transition to retirement period, it's important to think about it on your journey, because you don't want to get 65 and go, well, I just missed it.
I missed that step, yeah.
You want to be aware of it before you get there. And it is thinking about, do you want to actually step back in work? Do you want to go part-time? Do you want to change career? Do you want to just change your employment behaviour? Because at the age of 60, you can start using income from your super to supplement your employment income. It's also thinking about, at the age of 60, there's some strategies that come into the mix. There's things like you can be drawing down income at the same time that you're contributing to a super account. It allows you to actually set some things up around estate planning and accessing super and other strategies that you get at no point in time before then. But I'd also say that the third thing is around transition to retirement. And if you think about its name, use it as a period to test things out. Retirement used to be when you got to a certain age and on that day you retired and that was it. Transition to retirement allows you to start dipping your toe in the water in different ways. Take some time off, change the way you do things. Start to experience or move into retirement if that's what you want to do. That opportunity comes to you when you turn 60 and you don't want to just be ignorant of it.
If you can visualize the roadmap, I would say, that first part up until the age of 60, there are some milestones, but there might be many, many years in between those milestones. Once you get to 60, there's a little cluster of ages that pop up. The first one is opening up the opportunity for transition to retirement, which means potentially being able to access at least up to 10% of your balance at that point, even if you're still working full time. And often people say, well, why do we talk about transition to retirement being relevant between 60 and 65? Why does that opportunity stop at 65? So what's the relevance to age 65?
As soon as you've turned 65, you now have full access to your super, regardless of whether you're working or not. So the period between 60 and 65, there's some rules around it. If you're still
you're
working,
just limited in how much.
You're limited. If you retire at the age of 60, you've got full access.
Yeah.
But once you turn 65, your super is yours to do with what you wish, regardless of your employment status, regardless of your retirement status.
So that's an important age, because for our audience who might be getting close to 65, this is thinking about things, even if you didn't use the transition to retirement. There are considerations now to think about. Maybe you've got some debt and you think, you know what, I don't want to enter retirement into this debt. There's an opportunity here to reassess what my retirement will look like, where the income's going to come from, but also factoring external factors into it.
The way I would look at it is, as you go along the journey up until the age of 60, you've got contributions we talked about, where you've got investments, you've got insurance, okay? And although they may ebb and flow, they're quite consistent themes. When you get to 60, you come to a crossroad. And that crossroad is going to be unique for you and your circumstance. It gives you the opportunity to change the way you're working, gives you the opportunity to think about, do I access my super in some way? But it also, Ruth, does bring in, you should be cognizant of debt throughout your life and throughout that journey. That crossroad also gives you the opportunity to think about, well, am I going to utilise transition to retirement or access to my super in some way to pay down debt? Or do I need to think about it a different way? So I don't want to go into retirement with debt, although hopefully at that stage it's quite small. So for me, it's really a consideration of, well, what are the steps I can take now in the next 10, 15 years before I get to age 65, when I'm hoping to retire, what are the things now that I consider when it comes to debt management?
And before we wrap up, there is another age. So I mentioned there's a bit of a cluster once you get to 60. And that's 67. And we talked about 67's relevancy because that's essentially where, if you're eligible, you may qualify for some age pension. And we covered that in a previous episode not too long ago. So for anyone that wants to hear that, you can go back. So age 60, age 65, age 67, the milestones are pretty close here now. And then there's probably another one in there, and that is the day you've actually decided to retire. So the milestones are not as spread out as you hit that fork in the road at age 60, as you mentioned.
Most people make that choice as to the day they want to retire somewhere in their 60s.
Yeah.
So it is that golden age, I think you referred to it as. In my case, it's going to be silver. But it is this age where there's a lot of decisions, a lot of crossroads, a lot of opportunities that present themselves for the first time.
Well, I think it's safe to say that, you know, the journey is different for everyone. We all want the same things at the end of it, and that's to live a long and healthy and prosperous retirement. And you know, we're here to help our members to do that. But it is so important to remember that everyone will have unique stages and milestones along the way, and to always be mindful of what they are, what support is available to you when you get there, what opportunities are available.
So maybe, Ruth, we end on something that we did touch on very slightly, but is going to be consideration for some, and that's in our next podcast episode. Do you want to just
It
talk
is.
to that?
So it's a reality a lot of us face. We talked about it right throughout the journey, debt, paying down debt. One of the most common forms of debt is actually mortgages, and it's not something everyone is faced with. If there is a spare $100 in the household, is it better to put it in super or to try and pay down the mortgage?
It's a question we get so much. Yeah.
Now, neither of us are going to tackle that conversation. So next up to tackle that big beast is actually Anne. So stay tuned, and hopefully Josh and I will be back again in a future episode. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Ruth.